This is Edward Siegel. Welcome to the Crisis Ahead podcast. Each week, we look at how companies, organizations, and individuals in the news are responding to, managing, or recovering from a crisis, and what you can learn from their successes or failures. My observations and recommendations are based on my experience managing crisis situations and advising others on how to respond to and bounce back from disasters, scandals, and other emergencies. My guest today is Caroline Sapriel, Managing Partner of CS&A International. She'll be here shortly to talk about preparing and testing crisis management plans. But first, I want to say something about disinformation and misinformation. Business leaders should not hold their breath waiting for the federal government to help them in their battle against these two kinds of continuing crises that can put the image and reputation of companies at risk. Unfortunately, organizations will have to continue to fend for themselves the best way they can. That was the takeaway message for executives from a recent hearing by the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. The CEOs of Facebook, Google, and Twitter were questioned and sometimes grilled about their policies, procedures, and practices for monitoring and moderating content on their platforms. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle did voice their concerns, accusations, and counter-accusations about disinformation and misinformation, but the senators focused exclusively on the national political campaigns and the 2020 election. Unfortunately, there was no mention about the impact of disinformation and misinformation on businesses or how the current law could be changed to help protect them. I've written a new book that includes important advice and information on how you can manage and recover from more than 100 different types of crisis situations. Crisis Ahead: 101 Ways to Prepare for and Bounce Back from Disasters, Scandals, and Other Emergencies. Crisis Ahead is now available as a paperback book wherever books are sold and as an ebook from Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Crisis Ahead is filled with case studies about how companies and public figures have prepared for and handled crisis situations, and the important lessons you can learn from their successes and failures. The book also includes checklists and exercises to help you get ready for and react to a crisis. You can learn more about the book at publicrelations.com. It's not too early to start preparing for the next crisis. That's because history shows there is always a next crisis, and the sooner you are ready for it, the better. My guest today is Caroline Sapriel, Managing Partner of CS&A International, which is a risk, crisis, and business continuity management firm that serves clients in Europe, Asia, and the United States. Today we're going to discuss the importance of having a crisis management plan. Welcome to the show, Caroline.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
In 2019, you worked with PR News to conduct an international survey to find out how many companies have a crisis management plan in place. What were the results of that survey, Caroline?
The key results were that a good majority, 65% of surveyed entities had a crisis plan in place, but regrettably, only 37% had updated that. So that means that not everybody has a crisis plan, and then among those who have a crisis plan, quite a few of them are out of date. This was the major finding. And a lot of organizations also do not exercise their crisis plan.
A lot has happened, of course, since that survey was done, especially the worldwide pandemic. What has changed for companies since that study was done that would encourage them to prepare a crisis plan now if they didn't have one before?
I think this is, of course, a very good and relevant question. Every time there's a big crisis or something big really happens, the question comes back, is it going to shake organizations to be better prepared? Is it going to make a difference? My feeling at the moment is that definitely the awareness for crisis preparedness has increased. The question is, of course, how much is that going to be put in practice? Because the pandemic is having such an economic impact that for those organizations that are not committed to preparedness, that still see crisis preparedness, having a crisis plan as a cost rather than an investment, those organizations may say, well, we got other priorities and we're not going to spend money on this because, after all, we're living through the crisis and we're going to get practice in this way anyway. The other part, of course, is that those that have been committed, that have been doing it on, year out for years, that are really have invested time and in that preparedness, I believe that the pandemic is only going to reinforce this initiative and the work that they've done in this area. So I think a little bit of both. I think it depends a lot on the size of the organization, the industry they're in. Some industries are highly regulated for crisis preparedness, emergency response, pandemic preparedness, others less so.
Well, do you really think that having one plan is enough, or should companies have different plans for different types of crisis situations?
I think there's a lot of confusion between crisis management plans and business continuity plans. Crisis management plans are designed to provide organizations with a blueprint of the best practice in crisis response in terms of organization, in terms of the main actions to take on, priorities, competencies, and so on. Therefore, crisis management plans should never be scenario based because it's impossible to envision how many and what type of permutations can there be to all the crises that could take place, pandemic included. So the confusion is that with a lot of organizations, there is a lot of business continuity plans, and the business continuity plans are 100% scenario based because a business continuity plan prescribes what measures can be put in place to mitigate the impact of a crisis and encourage the continuation of business. So, therefore, there can be many different types of business continuity plans, including pandemic plans. So, I think the confusion is between crisis management plans and business continuity plans. The organizations that try to make multiple crisis management plans to fit every possible crisis are never going to make it. And it's like being in the forest and not seeing the trees.
Well said. Of course, having a plan is one thing, and testing to make sure it works is quite another. What percentage of companies that have plans actually test them to make sure they're going to work?
37%, according to our survey, have never exercised. Most organizations, the ones that do exercise, typically do it on a cycle of 12 to 18 months. Many organizations among the ones that we surveyed indicated that the last time they exercised was 5 years ago. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's plenty of quotes out there. Planning is everything. Plans are useless, but planning is everything. So the process of planning is very useful. But indeed, unless people know how to use the plans, it's not going to go very far. And I often compare this to a life jacket. I mean, you would never fly on a plane without a life jacket. But if you have a life jacket, you need to know that it works, that it's in good shape, that you need to know how to use it. And therefore, otherwise, it's just a piece of kit that's completely useless on the plane. And it's the same thing here. So knowing the plan, knowing the competencies of crisis management and crisis response and crisis leadership, and realizing that a crisis is not a bad week at the office, and therefore it requires specific skills, are the two things that need to work together. And I think a lot of people have a false sense of safety by saying, I've got a crisis plan, therefore I'm good. Tick the box.
Is there a recent example you can point to, Caroline, that shows what can happen if an organization does not have a plan in place?
Well, there are many organizations that actually don't have a plan, and the leadership at the top knows instinctively or through experience what it takes to respond well to a crisis. Equally, there are many organizations that do have a plan and don't do that. So I think the plan is the cornerstone or the foundation to make sure that the organization knows how to respond in a situation which is typically characterized by chaos, disorganization. So the first organization, the first response can be articulated to help everybody that's involved in the response process respond adequately. Now, the plan doesn't do everything. So there are many. I mean, if you were to take Boeing, for example, I know that for a fact that Boeing has a lot of crisis plans in place. Does that mean that they did a good job with the Air Max? No. They failed in multiple ways, the response to this mega crisis. They lost the trust of their stakeholders and they ended up in a reputation train wreck. And of course, financially, and it could, in many other ways, they have suffered greatly without even mentioning the people who've lost their lives. So that's an example of a company that I know for a fact that had lots of plans in place, lots of practice, and yet didn't do it right. So a plan is not a guarantee. I think a lot of it is in the culture, in the leadership skills of the person at the top of the organization, their experience, and their values.
Well, is it possible for a company to change, to do things right, and to get ready for a crisis if they're not ready for one now?
I believe that that is possible if you've been shaken enough through a past crisis, and you really take it seriously and you realize your own reputation and trust and stakeholder depends on doing it right the next time. I do believe it's possible, but again, it depends a lot on the leadership at the top. There are many examples of saying, "Whoops, we just made it. We just passed this one. It's not been that bad." And therefore, let's keep going. We didn't get caught, or we didn't get caught badly enough. So I think complacency is the problem, and to some extent, perhaps greed even.
Caroline, how much of the planning or even the testing has to be done in person? How much can really be done remotely?
Well, from experience, we've been doing virtual simulations for 10 years. Because already for a while, a lot of crisis teams are scattered around the world. And so, in many cases, bringing those people together for a real face to face exercise is actually not reflecting reality. A lot of these top management teams, the C suites, the boards, are not often together. So, we've been asked already 10 years ago to start running simulations on platforms for multiple stakeholders over extended period of time. Now, and that is proven very successful. That is very well suited to organizations who are committed to the topic, who want to do it as close to reality as possible. But even now, even among our clients, the ones that are always prefer to do it face to face because they felt the exchange between people was more valuable, have actually accepted that they can do this virtually and done it very successfully. And we've done that on several occasions, even more during the pandemic.
How often should a plan be tested?
At the top level of the organization, there should be, as a minimum, a major crisis exercise once a year. At the slightly lower level, the more operational levels, that should be more frequent. If you take oil and gas as an example, the emergency response team and the asset crisis teams exercise on a weekly basis. It's second nature. Aviation has the same. So it depends on the level. I think one of the things that's important is to provide teams with some things in between that they can use to refresh those skills, to consider different things, whilst accepting that people can't always take out of their schedule, come together when it suits. So, for example, we already 3 years ago launched a crisis management e-learning program, which is exactly designed to complement the face-to-face training. We have designed stock scenarios that provide with guidelines that actually provide clients an option to do little exercises in-house more frequently, that are self-guided, that don't require necessarily consultants and a big production. So I think there's a range of types of exercises and practice and testing that organizations can do. The big ones as a minimum once a year.
Well, cost, of course, can be an important consideration for any company or organization. How expensive is it to conduct these exercises?
If you compare the cost of an exercise to the cost of having a crisis, it's a drop in the ocean. Uh, I mean, yeah, I don't even know if you can actually measure it. An exercise, of course, again, there is complexity. So the more complex the exercise, the more teams it involves, the longer it lasts. Some of our clients are quite willing to exercise for 2 or 3 days and really run it live through their normal days. Those exercises, of course, more expensive, but then you can easily do a desktop exercise over 2-3 hours, involving minimum resources, and that's much, much cheaper.
Caroline, tell us how you got involved in the crisis management industry in the first place.
I come out of communication. I was working 30 years ago for a couple of major communications consultancies, and I had 3 clients who had major crises, including a major air crash. I was involved in it from the beginning, everything from managing next of kin to reputation to dealing with the media. It was very complicated. It was, during a political situation that made it worse. I've also been involved during that period in a pharmaceutical product that had to be recalled, and as well as in tobacco crises. So I had a lot of experience on the communication side. Now I decided to start together with my partner, CS&A International, because we felt that the communication side was only addressing one particular part. It is a fact that crises seldom start from communication, but they often end up in the communications professional's lap. And however, they often start either within or outside of the organization because of other problems. And so we embarked on an approach that integrated the different functions in the organizations, that looked at risk and issues, so as a prevention and anticipation, at the response and preparedness to emergency response and crisis preparedness, but also the recovery and the mitigation through business continuity. And we integrated all three, and I believe we're one of the few that it really is offering an integrated approach.
What else can you tell us about your company, and how can people find out more about it?
So my company, CS&A International, you can go, of course, online. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter. And my company specializes in giving high-level counsel, training. We typically intervene and support our clients before and after crises. We help with procedures. We have assessment tools that assesses their preparedness. We can map crises going forward. We can help them update procedures, integrate procedures. Then we go into training, competency development. We were asked by a major oil and gas company a few years ago to actually develop a crisis leadership competency protocol, because crisis leadership competencies are not very well researched by the academia. And this company really wanted to make sure that their people would be trained against specific competencies, as opposed to a tick the box. I've trained, I've attended the exercise, I've attended the training, I'm trained. So we developed a competency protocol and implemented it for a number of clients. We have a number of tools. We pioneered the first virtual crisis management communication platform that doesn't sit on the client servers. We developed this, the first version was in 1998, utilizing existing technology to prevent clients from using emails and all sorts of risky communication tools. And we focus both on the high level consulting. My firm is made up of a team of very experienced people. We don't assign projects to junior or anybody. We don't have anybody junior in the team anyways. And providing solutions that help clients, especially those who have good in-house capability, do what they do better. So facilitate their preparedness. That's what we focus on.
Well, thanks for joining me this week. My guest has been Caroline Sapriel. She's managing partner of CS&A International.
Thank you very much, Edwards. A pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Crisis Ahead podcast. Remember, it's not a matter of if companies and organizations will have a crisis, but when.